Hey, I'm Black Dragon, and what is this? Good Christmas Eve morning to you all. Good Christmas Eve afternoon. I guess it's 12 o'clock. So I hope you're all doing well. It's good to have you. Welcome to another edition of Black Dragon Biker TV. And as always, we'd like to thank you all for tuning in from wherever it is in the world that you happen to be. This is going to be an interesting show tonight. For those of you who are watching me, or this afternoon rather, for those of you who are watching me for the first time, Black Dragon Biker TV here on Facebook and YouTube, and Black Dragon Biker TV on Instagram, we concentrate on all things that have to do with motorcycle club culture and biker culture. And we kind of like to look at ourselves as the oracle of MC culture. And we are on almost every day on this thing, but we put out new content every Wednesday. And if you like this kind of information, we ask that you go ahead and follow us here on Facebook, like the page and follow us. And then if you like this video, please like the video and follow us. We have some new technology here, and it's been kind of choppy lately. So you might see me coming in choppy, and we're working on that. We're going to get some new computers here pretty soon to beef up and match the new stuff we've been doing. So it's kind of cool. But we still want to get the information out. So we are going to do this is also a podcast, the Dragon's Lair Motorcycle Chaos. So you can hear this wherever you get podcasts. So what we're doing here is we're still going to bring this information forward as we're getting everything worked out. And so this may be just one that you listen to if the video's not rolling good. We're not going to do video with our guest today because it's too late and it's too laggy. So we're just going to try to do one video and see how that works. So we're still testing out the new software, but we did a video on this subject yesterday, and it had so many viewers that I didn't want to wait until we got new software. I just wanted to keep rolling it, or wait until we got new hardware. I just wanted to keep rolling it. So that's what's going on here, and we definitely appreciate you guys for tuning in. So if let me see what we'll do here. I can't wait to introduce the next guest, and we're going to do that in just a second, and I'll be with you guys in about a minute. Alrighty, that was pretty cool. So today we have a guest. So let me kind of build the lead in for this. So yesterday we had Biker Barrister on, one of our writers, who was talking to us about. I had seen this video, this really interesting video where this guy had been pulled over by the police, and he decided that he did not want to, interact with him or whatever. So he rolls his window only far enough to get his license out the window. And it's an interesting video on YouTube. And he kept saying, I don't answer questions. I don't talk to the police. And you had all this going on. So we have an attorney that writes for the page, and his name is Biker Barrister. He's also in a writing club. And so we had Biker Barrister on yesterday. We were on for like an hour, maybe a little longer than that, and he was answering all kinds of questions. So I immediately got a message from this gentleman that we're about to introduce. I got a message from him last night, and he said that he didn't agree with several of the things that we talked about in the in that interview. He had some things that he felt like he wanted to talk about, as he has been in law enforcement for over 30 years. So, we're not afraid here on this channel. We'll talk to anybody. And, if somebody has something they want to say and it's relevant and it can help the channel, help the folks, help our bikers, we're going to talk to them. So I'm going to be talking to a Mr. Pablo Harnett. He is the president of Full Throttle, Full Mag Riding Association, the Utah chapter. He's also the chairman of the National Advisory Board, the International First Responders Alliance of Motorcycle Clubs. That's what he's the chairman of. And they call the International First Responders Alliance of Motorcycle Clubs the Alliance. And for good reason, because that's a long name. He's a lifelong law enforcement officer, retired, and a motorcycle rider. He's been a reserve police officer, a police officer, a deputy sheriff, an assistant police chief. And his assignments have included patrol cars, being on patrol, investigations. He was also what they call a motors cop, which for those of you who know anything about that terminology, meant he used to ride motorcycles. He's been in supervision and administration, and he also is now a field investigator for a state medical examiner. He's an adjunct college professor, teaches courses in criminal justice and political science. He has a bachelor's degree in bachelor's of criminal justice in public administration, and a master's degree in forensic science. And as far as his biker credentials, he's been a member of the Gold Wing Road Riders, coordinator of the Wings on Parade motorcycle drill team, past and present member of the Blue Knights Motorcycle Club, Utah, Chapter 4, member of the American Guardians PSMC, Utah 4-5B, which disbanded in 2012, past and founding member of Metal Republic PSMC, and current president of FTFM Utah. So his credentials are long, and he has obviously pulled over a lot of people and dealt with a lot of motorcycle and other incidents or situations where he's had people pulled over on the side of the road. So he wanted to talk to us about the thing where I was talking about yesterday. What do you have to tell the police? Do you have to tell them anything? He wanted to talk about it from a law enforcement perspective. And I think it's important to see how they see us when they pull us over. So let me please, let's see here. Yeah. Let me please bring to the show Mr. Pablo Harnett. You there?
Yeah, I'm here. Good morning.
Morning to you. I got this little new toy here that I'm still playing with. It's got all kinds of toys and sounds and everything.
Okay.
So I could have brought you in like an angel, but we decided to do this. So how are you, Pablo? How are things going? And how are you this Christmas Eve morning?
I'm well, thank you. I appreciate the time and the opportunity to talk to you and to talk to your listeners.
Sure. So, first of all, tell us a little bit about the Alliance and how that began.
The Alliance was started in 2013 when a group of like-minded public safety-based clubs got together and said, we are too fragmented. We don't network like we should. And we might be able to help ourselves and each other, if we tried to close those gaps. And so the Alliance was put together and really it's a network. It's a communications network where we reach out, we find like-minded clubs, we establish lines of communication so we can share information, and we can kind of work together to build social legitimacy.
That's pretty cool. And you guys are based out of where?
Well, we're all over the country. We have not chapters. We have member clubs in 35 states. So we don't really have a home base for the Alliance. The Alliance is conducted by a national advisory board made up of 5 members, and of course we're spread out in different states around the United States. And we have a regional emissary program, which is our boots on the ground. These are the people that coordinate and cultivate those relationships in their geographic area.
So you guys are first responders?
The Alliance was started by a handful of first responder clubs. But since then, we've opened the doors, and the Alliance is open to, law enforcement clubs, any public safety-based club, any military-based club. We have riding clubs. We have associations. We have traditional motorcycle clubs that don't use any public safety designator. I think that the one thing that we all have in common is that we generally support and allow membership and have membership of people from the public safety community. And we are oriented more around that than other forms of other perspectives in the motorcycle club world.
That's pretty cool. So let's get into your history a little bit. So you've been all over the police scene. You've done, looks like a little bit of everything.
I spent about 32 years in law enforcement, and only retired because of medical problems that I was having as I got older. I got within 5 years of my targeted retirement date and had to retire early because of medical issues. But I still work in the industry today and still teach in the public safety higher education subject matter.
So you were a motorcycle police officer. You've done patrol. You were an assistant police chief.
I started my career as a reserve officer, which is basically kind of part-time and mostly volunteer work. And after a couple of years of that, I decided that it was a good career move for me to move on. I worked in the engineering field prior to my police service, but I decided it would be a good career move to me to move into full-time law enforcement. And so I did that, and I worked for 2 cities in California. I spent about half my time in that state, the second half of my career in that state with a sheriff's department, the Orange County Sheriff's Department. And then in the late 90s, I relocated to Utah, and I ended up as the assistant chief of public safety for a local campus college police department here in higher education. So
what started this whole thing for me was I saw this video of this guy who just absolutely wouldn't cooperate with the police. And I guess he cooperated some because he gave him his information finally, and handed it out of the window and so much, so forth and so on. But he kept saying, I don't answer questions. I'm not answering questions. And I thought that was interesting because I watch a lot of cops. I watch, those shows, Cops, Live PD, all of those kinds of shows. And, of course, Law and Order SUV, all this kind of stuff. And every time somebody tries that, they seem to go straight to jail for obstruction or something like that. I've never really seen anybody get away with that. And then, you see these free citizens on all these YouTube channels, and also the Cop Watch and the I think we lost him. I heard that we lost him sound. Let me get him back here.
Hi, John, you there?
Yeah, we're here. So we see that. Let me see. What I was saying. Those cop shows. And every time I see somebody try to do this, they get them for obstruction of justice or something. So I'm watching all of these free citizens and all this kind of stuff on these YouTube channels. And the one I like, the other one is the audits, the freedom of speech audits. And these guys get away with it on their videos. But when I'm watching the cop videos, they don't get away with it. So I just came up with I was just wondering, what the heck do you have to tell them? So we had an attorney on yesterday who works for the channel, and you said that you didn't like some of the things, or you didn't agree with some of the things, or maybe you wanted to approach some of perspective. So what do you have to say? What's your general overall discussion? And let's hear what you're talking about.
Okay, first, I mean no disrespect to your guest from yesterday, but in listening to what he had to say, I found some of it to be confusing. Number one, leading people to the conclusion that it's okay to do things on a traffic stop that are going to get them in trouble. And so I thought I would give it to you from my perspective, which is very simplified and more straightforward, and it's pros and cons, do this, don't do that, kind of thing. So what I'd like to do is, from the legal perspective, the rights of the citizen and the power of the law of the police, just walk you through a traffic stop, and tell you, what the police are going to do and what you are required to do and what flexibility you have as a citizen.
All right, so I'm riding my motorcycle down the road, and I see the blue or red lights, depending on where I am in the country, behind me. And I slow on down, find a shoulder, and I pull over. And so now we're into the traffic stop. So talk to me.
Okay. Well, the stop itself, first of all, should not be made unless there's a reason. Any police officer, any reasonable police officer knows that you don't just randomly pull people over for no articulable reason. So there's two levels of offense that come into play. One is the traffic stop based on probable cause. Probable cause simply means that the officer has, information that leads him to believe that this driver has committed some violation of law, or there is a public safety reason for making this stop. But there has to be a reason. You can't just make a stop because you're riding a motorcycle, or because you're just because you're wearing a cut, or any other reason that really doesn't amount to a violation of law or a public safety necessity. So, he makes the stop. He approaches you and asks for identification. And here's sometimes where the misconception begins. Some people interpret the Fifth Amendment to say, I don't have to identify myself. I don't have to tell you who I am because I don't have to talk to you. The Fifth Amendment does protect every motorist against self-incrimination. But the courts have ruled that identifying yourself is not self-incrimination. And if you are legitimately stopped and legitimately asked to identify yourself, you must do so. And so, for some people, that means stick a driver's license out the window, but don't ask me any questions. Well, what if the figure on the driver's license doesn't look like the person sitting in the driver's seat? A lot of reasons why that could happen when they are in fact one and the same person. What if, how many people have their current address on the face of their driver's license? Or the bigger question is how many don't? So the officer is likely to ask some questions. And the questions are confirmatory questions, if I look at somebody and they don't look like the picture on their driver's license, I'm going to ask them what their middle name is. I'm going to ask them what their date of birth is. They're just things that help me confirm the identity, because simply handing someone a card with information on it may not rise to the level of establishing appropriate identity. So you do have to properly identify yourself. And if that involves a little bit of Q&A for the officer to confirm who you are, he's not violating your rights and you're not protected by the Fifth Amendment.
That's interesting, but I don't have to answer a confirmatory question, do I? I mean, I gave you my license that identified me, and I don't have to talk to you any further. Because to speak to you if anything I say can and will be used against me, and at the time I'm at a police stop, I am not free to go, then I am detained. And the minute I'm detained from that moment further, I don't have to speak by whatever amendment that is that says I have the right to remain silent and I don't have to incriminate myself. Is that not true?
That is true, but establishing and confirming identity is not self-incrimination. I mean, what if you don't have any identification, and the officer asks you who you are? You still have to identify yourself, even if you're not carrying that particular card. It doesn't rise to the level of self-incrimination because disclosing your identity, it doesn't necessarily confirm guilt in any particular criminal offense, doesn't carry with it any particular penalty. Some other examples of this are, let's say that you're detained in connection with a criminal investigation and you're asked to stand in a lineup. You don't have the right to refuse. Let's say that you're suspected of forgery and you're asked to complete a handwriting exemplar for handwriting comparison purposes. All of this stuff, from a police investigative standpoint, is permissible to do. And when they require you to do this, they're not violating your Fifth Amendment rights. That said, you can still refuse. And that refusal, may come back to haunt you. But, nobody's going to put the pen in your hand and force you to write. Nobody's going to, try to turn on your voice box and make you speak. It doesn't really happen that way. But for the sake of getting through the stop, my advice to anybody is be prepared to identify yourself. Be prepared for full disclosure in that regard, because if you're not, the officer's not satisfied with, that he has properly identified you, he may detain you even further. Why bother? Why put yourself in that position just to be obstinate if it isn't necessary?
Well, I definitely agree with you that there is a line between trying to there's a line between standing resolutely on something that's going to really cause you a whole bunch of trouble and just getting through the stop. I often tell people, do what you need to do to get through the stop. So if you're sitting there and a person has sufficiently frustrated you that they're not cooperating, what's the next step? I mean, we see it on cops all the time. They get their asses snatched out of the car and slammed to the ground, and they get to business. But yeah.
From a procedural standpoint, if the officer is not satisfied that you've appropriately identified yourself, most states have a statute that allows him to take you into custody. A good example is the state of Massachusetts. You can be taken into custody in the state of Massachusetts for not having a driver's license in your possession, no matter what you say to the officer. That doesn't mean that's what he's going to do, but he has that option if he feels like he needs it. And the same is true in many other states that, if the officer can articulate and feels that he is being misled or deceived about a person's identity based on their unwillingness, to help confirm it, he has the right to take you into custody and not release you until he has established their identity if there is an articulable offense preceding the whole thing. Again, pulling people over for no reason, to all the cops out there, they all know that's not a good idea. And so, if you're going to pull somebody over and you've got that reason, that articulable suspicion or that probable cause to make that stop, they now have an obligation to see it through. And that means that when a person is suspected of any level of offense, to properly identify that person so that, anything that follows is directed towards the right individual and the right person is held accountable.
So we'll establish that maybe you need to identify yourself. Maybe you need to say, okay, I'm Mr. X. Okay. But then the next thing the person asks you, the police officer asks you is, where are you going? Where'd you come from? When that starts to happen, I shut down. My thing is I don't answer DWB kind of questions. That to me, where I'm going and where I'm coming from is not germane to why I was pulled over. So, what do you think about, what do you have to say about that?
I have no reason to doubt what you're saying, and I can tell you that you have every right not to answer that question. I mean, if the officer feels like it's relevant to his investigation, he may take the time to explain that. He can ask the question, but you don't have to answer it.
So, let's see. Someone said, in the USA, does your address on your license not need to be updated immediately? It does in the UK. Christopher, in the United States, I think you get like 10 days or something in most places that I've seen. What do you think, Pablo?
So there is a grace period, absolutely, and the officer will generally ask for a confirmation because it is so common for people to move and overlook, that step. It's not, I don't see it as an intent to deceive anyone, but, in the stress of moving, and relocating, especially if it's within the same state, maybe the last thing on that person's checklist. I've done it myself where, I simply have failed to contact the state and say, listen, I was living over on 3rd South and now I'm living on 2nd North, and that needs to be on your driver's license. So you need to notify them. It's a simple oversight. But the reason the officer would ask for confirmation is because if he writes you a ticket, you're going to get some correspondence from the court. And ideally it needs to go to the right address, because it's not a defense for a person to say, well, I moved and I never received the notification. That's why I didn't pay the fine, or that's why I didn't appear or contact the court. So the officer is just doing his job when he's trying to confirm the right address.
So the next thing that we move into often is, after we get to the where are you going, where have you been, where you headed, the next thing is, do you mind if I search your vehicle? And, for me, it's always absolutely not. You may not search my vehicle, not for any reason.
I know I'm not giving up any secrets here, but, vehicle stops and vehicle searches are treated a little bit differently under the Fourth Amendment search and seizure law and procedures, recognized by law enforcement agencies because of the fleeting, target nature of the vehicle and the fact that, it's inappropriate to keep somebody by the side of the road for the time that it would take to get a search warrant. Typically most traffic stops are limited to the time that it takes to address the motorist, identify the motorist, issue the citation or the warning, whatever you're doing, and send that person on their way. Now, if probable cause for further investigation arises in that time, then a longer detention may be appropriate. But as far as searching the vehicle goes, consent is one way that officers have. They can ask, you can say no. And once you said no, no means no. But if the officer has the same probable cause he would need to get a judge to give him a warrant to search your car, he can search it without the warrant and without your consent. But that probable cause has to be strong because it's the first thing that even a bad defense attorney will challenge. And if a judge at a preliminary hearing, determines that you did not have probable cause, anything you might have found will be excluded. And that may end the case right then and there. And so cops know this. So, asking, you can always ask. And yes, the driver can always refuse. And to go a step further, the driver can consent, but then withdraw consent once it's been given.
So, you have these things you can say and you can't say. You don't have. You do have to answer. You don't have to answer. So you can definitely say, "This is my name. That's my address." But I'm not answering any questions about where I'm coming from, where I'm going, and you may not search my car. But when I see all these things get escalated, it's always a person that's done exactly that, but he's still winding up getting his ass snatched out of his car and getting the business. So we see this like every single day. And I'm not saying by any means that every officer is like that or anything like that. I'm just saying that we see enough of it. So what is the best way to get out of to get through a traffic stop? If you are a citizen, you don't feel like being overly harassed. You don't feel like being overly questioned, but you don't want to take the risk of escalation, but you don't want to just give in altogether. So what's the best advice coming from your side of the fence?
For me, I would say the first thing is stay calm, just talk to the officer. I mean, if you ask me a question you're not comfortable answering, you don't want to answer it, just tell them, I'm sorry, I'm not, I'm not comfortable answering that, or I don't see, rather than turn it into an argument, which is where things start to go south. There's a conversational technique known as verbal judo where you can kind of, even if you take the question as a punch, you can still roll with it and move on to the next one. And that simply means, that when an officer says, so we headed today, I mean, you could say, yeah, it's none of your damn business, that conversation is not going to probably go in the direction you want, or you can say, officer, that's not really relevant. I mean, if you could just, explain to me why you stopped me and what we're going to do, that would probably be the best thing. A reasonable cop is going to do exactly that. Here's why I pulled you over. Here's what I intend to do. All other things being all other requirements being satisfied, he feels like he's comfortable with your identity, comfortable with your ownership of the vehicle. You have the required roadside documents, which is driver's license, registration, proof of insurance, and he stopped you for a legitimate reason. Then the next logical step is to proceed with whatever that stop was. As the officer, what am I going to do? I may give this person a warning, and just say, this is what I saw you do. Here's why it's a bad idea to do that. If I could get from you just a nod of voluntary compliance, we can both be on our way. Some states do written warnings to document the stop. There's no penalty for that. Some states do verbal warnings, and I've worked in both. Either way. Or if the officer feels that a citation is appropriate, just write the damn citation. Explain to the person what the citation is, what they're being cited for. But the next thing is, if a citation is issued and you require a signature, that's generally the next obstacle. Some people say, well, I'm not signing that citation. I don't have to sign that citation. A reasonable officer will have explained in advance signing a citation is not an admission of guilt, simply a promise to see it through. Respond by mail if that's what's called for, appear in court if that's what's called for, pay a fine if that's what's required. Somehow acknowledge to the court that you received the citation and that you intend to take the next step to deal with it based on what your options are. But the signing a citation, I find, has always been the biggest obstacle because people believe that signing a citation is tantamount to self-incrimination when in fact it is not. But it does impose an obligation on the person to deal with it. But getting back to your question, how do you get through a stop? Stay calm, be polite, be pleasant, be as cooperative as you can be. And when you don't feel that you can be cooperative, articulate that. Hey, would you mind if I took a quick look in your car? No, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm sorry. No reason for you to search my car, and I'm not going to give you permission. Most cops won't even ask that question. If they have probable cause to search your car, they're going to search it anyway. If they don't have it and they do ask, you have the right to say no, and that should be the end of the conversation.
I think I like that term, verbal judo. I'm going to start utilizing that. I'll let everybody know I got it from you. I think verbal judo is probably pretty smart because you can definitely escalate things, especially when you're having a pitching contest on the side of the road, and that's never going to end up well for you, depending on what you're facing. So I think verbal judo is just probably like one of my biggest takeaways from this part of the conversation.
Verbal judo was created by a psychologist named George Vaughn, who was also a law enforcement officer. And he created a training program for cops, in dealing with uncooperative and difficult people. When people start with the name calling and the accusatory tones and the, overtly offensive and aggressive tone of voice, rather than escalate right along with them and get yourself into trouble, that there is a way to deflect those things and keep the conversation moving in a more productive direction. That's what verbal judo is about. I recommend it for everybody. Other industries, other professions have actually adopted various forms of it, to help keep people communicating more productively rather than allowing the communication to turn into something that doesn't end well for anybody.
That's very interesting. Verbal judo. So I think we've there is this one thing. So the video I sent you this morning where you saw the man over in Sonoma, California. He'd run from the police. It's really a sad story. The man was he'd been carjacked a couple days earlier and beaten with a gun and had his car taken from him. Some kind of way, this man got his car back. So when the police saw the car, but he didn't alert the police that he had gotten his car back. So when the police see the car, they see him, they try to pull him over, and it results in this crazy car chase, which goes like 22 miles. And by the time the car chase is over, it stopped on a street that ran out. He was immediately pretty much, they got there, they didn't like his answers. He wasn't getting the door open quite quick enough, and this resulted in him being snatched out of the car, choked, and subsequently died on the scene. So what you saw in that video, would you care to elaborate? What was your feelings when you were watching that?
Well, let's just say that, I'll mirror what the sheriff said at the introduction of the video. It was troubling. That the use of force was clearly excessive and probably well outside the department's policy on the use of force. All law enforcement agencies have use of force policies that basically say any force that goes beyond that which is necessary to complete the task at hand or to overcome the resistance at hand, it could be deemed unreasonable. So what's the level of the threat? Because the force used has to be commensurate with that. And in this case, the technique that was used to remove the man from the vehicle was totally unnecessary. They could have accomplished that in a much less intrusive way. And I hate to say that, about my brethren in law enforcement, but even the sheriff said it, and I can't disagree. That it was wrong. But, equating what you saw there to the death of this man, that's another question. Because, like the video said, the coroner's report or the medical examiner's report has not been completed. They've not been able to, as of yet, articulate the exact cause of death or what killed him. Was it hitting his head on the A-pillar? Maybe, but probably not. Was it the chokehold? Maybe, but probably not. The autopsy will determine that because artifacts of both of those things, and those are the two things that are most concerning. That at the autopsy, knowing what occurred, seeing the body camera, the pathologist will apply, medical, legal investigative techniques, try to uncover those injuries and determine whether or not they were life-threatening. There's another thing to think about here. This guy is believed to have suffered from some form of mental illness. And this is important because, mental illness comes in a lot of forms. It could be drug induced, it could be lifestyle induced, it could be organic, meaning that the person has no responsibility for it. It is simply the unbalanced physiology of their own brain and body. But the people who suffer from organic mental illness, what happens to them in a situation like that is that their adrenaline level, like anybody's, begins to rise. And as that happens, their physiology accelerates. But with people who suffer from certain forms of mental illness or brain disease, let's just call it that, part of that process is the escalation or the elevation of their core temperature to the point where their brainstem can heat up to 107, 108 degrees, which is why a person is involved in a very intense struggle, with the police or anybody else under those circumstances, suddenly stops struggling, suddenly goes quiet, suddenly quits breathing, and then rapidly dies. This is a condition called excited delirium. And I'm not saying that's what happened in this case because, only the autopsy can determine that based on an examination of his brain. But it's possible, that what these officers did not directly cause his death. That's possible. And I think, of course, that's a matter to be decided later. It's not something that the armchair quarterbacks can determine right now, although, many think that that's appropriate. When in fact it's not. Everybody's entitled to a fair shake in this case, including and the victim, by the victim I mean the motorist. The cops involved, all entitled to a fair shake. The notice of dismissal against that one deputy was done based on what they could articulate and see right then and there as violations of department policy, regardless of the outcome. And of course it's the sheriff or the chief's prerogative to do that. And he feels he's doing what's best for his agency, and that's his job. And I certainly will not quarrel with him over that, because I think that transparency is important, and the making of this video, the presentation of that chief both before and after the video, is all about transparency. There's nothing being hidden here. There are still things that are unknown. And as far as them not knowing that he had recovered the car, I'm going to speculate here. I'm betting that while it may have been reported as a carjacking, he knew who took the car from him, and that's how he managed to get it back, by making contact. But he simply failed to report that to the police, and when they spotted the car, they believed they were following a felon.
Absolutely. I watched the video, and I was dismayed by the level of violence. But I also know that he contributed in every way to what happened. It wasn't, in my opinion, it wasn't right. And as you said, the sheriff said it wasn't right to the point that he saw enough violations of department policy that he gave the officer a notice of dismissal. But
it's fair to say that in a perfect world, at that point in that incident, that he was given clear orders which he failed to follow. Just at every step along the way. And when he did try to comply, it was only kind of half-hearted, In a perfect world, he would have been clearly and directly ordered from the vehicle, and he would have exited pursuant to that order and been taken into custody without incident. But that didn't happen. And who knows why, Who knows why he was so uncooperative? It may be that mentally he was in a state where he couldn't process the information. There's also
right.
That.
Well, in a perfect world, he wouldn't have run from the cops to begin with. And once they get to that point, everybody is so. I mean, I see. I mean, it's terrible what happens, and so unfortunate that he died. But I talk to folks all the time. I have a lot of young bikers. I have a lot of young black bikers. African Americans have a different experience in this country. And that is just the way that it is. And my thing is compliance doesn't always guarantee survival, but compliance guarantees survival more times than not. And when I'm ordered out of a car or when the red lights come on, that's when I stop resisting and I do what the folks ask me to do, because I'd just much rather be here tomorrow than, especially when you have issues like high blood pressure and diabetes, and so many people are overweight, and a shock like that to your body, getting pulled around, choked, tasered for minutes on end, these kinds of things are not detrimental to healthy people. You can taser a healthy guy all damn night long, but a guy that's of marginal health, overweight, doesn't exercise, a shock like that to the body can take his ass clear out.
Sure, I agree. If you want to see what can happen, look up. Just take the term excited delirium and look at YouTube videos on that. There've been many posted by law enforcement agencies where they've had to deal with somebody who is so irrational, so beyond any rational control, that high levels of force had to be used just to contain the person, and then suddenly they die. Suddenly without any warning, they calm down, they stop resisting, then they stop breathing, and then they die. And more often than not, what they find at the root of it all is either organic brain disease based on some physiology outside that person's control, or brain disease as a result of chronic long-term drug use, like of drugs, cocaine and methamphetamine and central nervous system stimulants, that will accelerate that person's physiological response to a high stress situation, even when they don't know they're in it. You know, I mean, if you can give somebody an order to do something and they can understand that order, if the order is lawful, they should comply. What I see is people who are rational, reasonable, and normal people being contacted by the police and then responding from a place of anger. You know, when that interaction begins, you know, and that generally sets the tone for how that situation is gonna turn out. You know, because when that happens, it may rise to the level of the officer feeling threatened. You know, cops are people too. They're no different than anybody else. They're not Superman. They don't have special powers of courage, or anything like that. You know, some develop a little bit of intuition along the way, which is a good thing. A little fear can be a healthy thing. But, you know, if you're going to become the antagonist, you know, as a motorist from the get-go, it's probably not going to end well for you because, you know, every cop goes out there these days wondering if today's their day, if today's the day that it's going to happen to them. You know, I mean, we had 39 officers, you know, murdered in the line of duty this year alone. Murdered meaning unlawfully killed in circumstances that did not warrant that kind of a response from the person who did the killing. You know, and if you're a cop, you have to think about this. And when you walk up on somebody's car because you pulled them over for a traffic violation or you pulled up on a biker or anybody like